Hello, Mystic Travelers. It's me, Jazz, and welcome back. I'm actually doing a special reading today based on this really big Saturn-Neptune conjunction at 0 degrees Aries, the Aries Point, which is the first degree of the zodiac. So this is something that, Saturn-Neptune conjunct every, I think, 36 years, I believe. But this is extra special because it being at the Aries point. And in the past, it has coincided with really, really big events. The Saturn-Neptune conjunction, whether that is a big event in the sense of in Aries or in other signs, but with it being in Aries, it's a lot more rare. So we're going to talk about this today. Somebody had asked me to go into it, so I picked a one archetypal card for it, the gem. Okay, cool. So the entire thing about Saturn and Neptune, Saturn is like structure, even with governments, boundaries, this lived reality. Neptune is like spirituality, the collective consciousness, dreams, dissolution of old things, dissolution of reality as we know it. And so with this 0 degrees Aries, with this conjunction, it's all about a cycle reset. So let's take a look at a few shadow cards. So this is definitely on a bigger scale we're talking about, but always remember that things are fractal. So the big reflects the small reflects the big. So whatever's going on in the bigger picture has lessons for your regular life and vice versa. I also did Moonology cards because I just feel like... So with the gem here, we know that the Saturn-Neptune's conjunction has a lot to do with the collapse of illusions around authority, because Saturn is forcing reality checks while Neptune is dissolving, I was saying earlier, it's dissolving those illusions of what we think is reality. So it's a lot of times a full collapse, false narratives collapsing, right? So getting the gem card is actually really good, because to me this says that, like, in the midst of all this mess, because right here, these are very similar images to the underworld card, where it almost looks like they're like maggots and bugs and things, but then there's a gem in the center of it as an archetype. So to me, this says, like, out of this will arise something better. So sometimes things that are catastrophic on the surface are actually clearing out the old things that have actually been truly catastrophic. Just we got used to that level of catastrophic, or it became acceptable, or we started allowing it in little by little over many, many years. Look at that. If you follow my channel, you know that this is the shadow card in this shadow, what I call this my shadow deck. It's a storytelling deck, but this card comes up so much because we're always talking about shadow work. The idea that society and the world at large, its time is coming due. Aldous Huxley says something along the lines of, like, you have to face your stuff, because if you don't, the longer you wait, the higher the price will be. And so here we have been hiding from our true shadows, right? The world acting like that the status quo is okay, when we're discovering that all this stuff is going on under the surface. But there's a difference this time, because one thing about this Saturn-Neptune in the first degree of Aries, 0 degrees Aries, is the idea of a technology and spiritual fusion movements, right? So we have this rise of technology. I always called it techno-mysticism, but it's the idea that technology can be our savior, but it can also be obviously used for bad things. So in the past, when really toxic regimes and things like that would take over, we didn't have the technology to communicate the way we do now. So even though technology is used to ensnare people's minds, it is used to confuse people, to misguide people, to speak directly to people's subconscious so that it can reprogram them without them knowing it. It also is, information moves so quickly. So it is like people are living in two different realities right now. There's the reality of the people who listen to the propaganda, and there's the reality of people moving true information. And so it's kind of a battle right now. Oh, look at that. Yeah. With this conjunction, first of all, there's going to definitely be confusion before clarity. I memean, we're having, humankind is having an identity crisis. And, the energy of this conjunction started last year, and it'll kind of peak between now and April. We know this isn't just like, oh, even though February 20th is the day, it doesn't mean that February 20th is the only day influenced by this. So this reminds me of Ma'at, the Egyptian goddess who weighs your heart against a feather. And if your heart is heavier, then your heart gets thrown to Amet, the crocodile god Amet. And so here we have a bag of money. Isn't this the problem right now? The reason of this collapse, the reason of this need to restart a new karmic cycle. Because the old cycle, based around money rather than humanity, it's never going to be lighter than the feather, right? Here it shows it lighter than a feather, because there's this thing. So I heard this from a psychologist one time, that basically it was about narcissists. Two narcissists, they train you that bad is good and good is bad. So basically they might abuse you and say that's good. So then you start believing that that's okay. And then you might be compassionate and they say that's bad. And so then you learn that compassion is dangerous. And this is exactly what's going on in our culture, saying money is more important than humanity. Money is more important than people's hearts. And so this is that juxtaposition of, why is the money bag lighter than a feather instead of a heart? Why is money replacing heart? And you even have rich people and famous people and stuff talking about how empathy is a weakness, right? Process your feelings. Changes. Okay, yes. So, yeah, it's clear that there are big changes coming, right? Big changes coming. But with this quicksilver moon, we're talking about Mercury. There's just a lot of transformative energy here, a lot of energy around communication. And that goes back to the idea of techno-mysticism, about how technology's advancement might be the thing that actually stops this kind of thing in its tracks. Not all at once, not slowly, because this is definitely about, like I said, while Saturn is trying to solidify, Neptune is going to blur. So there'll be confusion, policy instability, like I said, identity crisis, the feeling that reality isn't real or that it's unstable because the old world is dying and the new world has not yet, the foundation for the new world has not yet been laid out. And so with that comes levels of confusion on, humankind scale, country scale, and individual person scale. 5 and 6 of Pentacles. Yeah, this is the idea of like scarcity, right? With the 5 of Pentacles, except they're right outside of a sanctuary. So there's scarcity, but they could just walk in the building, right? And isn't that where humanity has been? Because, this conjunction is all about big scale things happening, right? We know the outer planets, the further out the planets, the kind of more the influence comes from larger scale things. But also during this, so this scarcity is false scarcity, and it comes from the idea of, that, let's say we need to militarize things. And this is coming from the Saturn-Neptune conjunction, by the way, especially because it's in Aries, right? So, militarized or aggressive spiritual rhetoric, false scarcity, blaming the poor for things when there is enough to actually go around. So this is the karmic cycle that is dying and closing out. But, you know, this kind of combination definitely leads to leadership struggles, territory tensions, identity wars. And we're going to talk a little bit more about, that sounds all scary because what we're doing is closing out an old cycle and, you know, coming into a new one. And not just any cycle, but one that takes hundreds of years to go through. But the next 36-year karmic cycle is focused on the birth of the new political era / spiritual era, and how technology will likely play into that. Look at all this Pentacles energy. Lots of Pentacles energy here. And a couple of butts that I need to cover up. So, let's see. Yeah. So, you know, we have the resources to be generous. And this transmutation between, you know, during this new karmic cycle is making it clear to people that this is actually a terrible system. It's a terrible system to expect that the wealthy people, the people who got wealthy by crushing other people, are going to be generous enough to take care of the poor on their own. So here we're looking, there's got to be a new system. But a new system will mean the collapse of the old. And that's where judgment comes in, right? Judgment. Also, coming back to this one because I forgot to say it, but processing your feelings, how people understanding, they're coming to an understanding of how this system isn't new. They're just seeing it clearly for the first time, that this has been happening forever. But now we have the technology, we have the information, we have the movement of information that allows judgment to come into play once and for all. And with that, changes are inevitable. Now, I don't want to be all doom and gloom. I also want to talk, because it's not really, I mean, if these systems are already in play, it's a good thing that they become destroyed, right? And collapse. Because if structures built on the backs of the vulnerable are not structures worth keeping, structures that exploit people are not structures worth keeping. Look at that, the Fool. Unmanifest. That means starting over. Unmanifest means starting over from scratch, right? Not building on the system that's already broken, but creating something new. And I'm going to use this to leap off into there are higher expressions of this conjunction, right? So obviously there's all this turmoil and there's all these difficult things, because nothing, you know, when you have to change something big, it can be an extremely painful, difficult process. So, for example, I like meteorology. And in meteorology, I was listening to a professor one time talking about it, and he said that nature abhors chaos. So we always think of like weather as chaotic, like a tornado is chaos, wind is chaos. But actually what happens is lightning, tornadoes, all of those are natural consequences of things so out of balance that only something violent can sweep it all clean. And I don't mean necessarily literal, like there's going to be a violent revolution or something. I mean, it's pretty scary out there right now, so who knows. But what I'm saying is that it's going to feel very difficult, very challenging. And that's just part of moving and changing. In tarot, the Tower card, the lightning bolt, it represents people think of the tower as being a destroying. The lightning bolt destroys the tower. But really the lightning bolt is the clarity that wakes you up. So the tower isn't destroyed because there was an external force. The tower was destroyed because you realized the truth. Queen of Wands, Magician, we're looking here at the higher expressions of this conjunction. Look at all this major arcana energy going on. And we also have a court card here. Oh my goodness, Wheel of Fortune. Jeepers Christmas. Jeepers Christmas. Okay. So sometimes things have to get so extreme, almost like a caricature, in order for us to understand how valuable things are, like compassion, democracy, empathy, right? Things kind of we take for granted in a day-to-day life a lot of times. The Queen of Wands is calling us to stand forward in disciplined compassion, right? Right. And over here, we're talking about building structures around vision instead of fantasy. So going back to the idea of technology, when we're talking about technology being used against us, but also for us, technology can be used to give, false narratives, which is building structure around fantasy. The fantasy of, that the world works a certain way, or the fantasy that certain people are, doing things or not doing things for certain reasons, and they just expect you to believe the narrative that they say. But with this Magician here, it's a call between the Queen of Wands, like I said, discipline, compassion, into spiritual maturity. And spiritual maturity is not just like, oh, now I'm a monk or something. Spiritual maturity is emotional growth, the growth of empathy, the growth of understanding that we are all interconnected, leaving behind the old world, even if it is painful to do, even if those structures are going to leave you feeling lost for a while. But the Chariot is pushing us forward. And with the Wheel of Fortune here, the Wheel of Fortune, the wheel turns in your favor. The Wheel of Fortune is just, what do they call it? Anunke and Greek philosophy, Anunke and Logos. So Anunke is is fate or destiny, right? But Logos, that is the inner core of your own wisdom that allows you to stay solid no matter what fate gives you. So with this idea of spiritual maturity, discipline, compassion, and then over here with what I was saying, realistic idealism, and then building structures around vision instead of illusion. So basically, I think the idea is like, how are we going to make the dream practical for everybody, not for just a few people? And I feel like that's what this invitation is. There's this idea that the good guys are always humble and quiet, but that needs to be questioned, right? Who is that serving? If the people who are hurting other people are loud and doing all these things, how does being humble and following the status quo help anybody? Where this whole conjunction is rewriting not just political movements and personal things, but the very way our minds are structured around meaning. Love endures and accept. I love this because, no matter what happens in these big picture things, the things that keep us together as humans, the things that make us understand and grow, it is love. Whether that's love where you are loving a piece of land, loving your job. More importantly, though, how are you loving the people around you? How are you authentically loving yourself? See, that's bringing this big picture into focus into your life. Except, going back to this idea of Logos and Anunke, I'm actually, in March, I'm doing some videos on Prometheus, and the idea, the whole month is about, for the Mystics Library, it's about inner sovereignty, no matter what the outer circumstances are. And I feel like with this reading and knowing what I know about this Saturn, Neptune conjunct in Aries. So first of all, the collapse of illusions around authority, the birth of a new spiritual and political era, and the confusion before clarity is that as all these things are shifting and moving, you're going to be drawn inward. To make the dream practical, you have to become so solid and at home in yourself that all this chaos outside does not shake you. That is pure acceptance, right? We have Death here with his sickle, his scythe, in a field of, looks like poppies. Poppies, illusions, dreams, love endures. What a juxtaposition. Well, big things are coming, big things are changing, but you know what? I don't think you needed a reading to know that. But I would say with this, it's sort of the kind of thing where like, what is falling away, what is falling apart is what needs to fall away and fall apart. This is a reckoning. But for the individual, the reckoning is more about the illusions that we were conditioned into and the feeling of betrayal around that. And also the practical ways that it affects our lives in scarcity. So my advice would definitely be focus on discipline, compassion, loving people and animals, because I had 2 cute puppies just tinkle their little toes in here. And don't get caught up in their identity wars. Don't get caught up in the propaganda. Make sure you're like doing your research, but with real resources, right? And if you're not sure about how to find, you need to think of like peer review. There's a lot of websites that help you look up how biased a certain news source is. And it's going to be more important than ever as this technology is used both against us as a people, as humankind, and is the actual key, the reason why we won't fall into it as deeply as we have in the past, because we're moving information so quickly. Accept what you need to accept. Send love out there on your small scale, even when the world is falling apart. But just remember, falling apart when the world is the way it is not a moral failing, right? In a lot of places, the U.S. definitely being one of them, there's this idea of fierce individualism. And this is definitely something that has led to a lot of the problems we have. They blame the individual for everything. Everything. Right? Whereas they don't blame a system. If say like 70 or 80% of your population is depressed, that's not an individual crisis. That is a systemic crisis. If there's a huge amount of people homeless or without food, that's a systemic problem. It's not that individual person's fault, And so, but with the kind of idea of fierce individualism, then everything becomes your fault, right? So that's what I see in regards to what's going on in the world with this conjunction. And I don't usually do these, but like I said, I had somebody ask for this specifically. And if you guys want anything else like this, just let me know. When it comes to astrology or events or anything, I'll be happy to do more readings on it. And thank you for being here. And we're going to get through this. We're going to get through this together. So be well, mystic travelers.